Welcome back. In this section, we're going to talk about finding stuff from our database. So in the last section, of course, what we did was we created a Mongo client, we connected to our database, we added these books, these 3 books. And so what I'm going to do here, what I'm going to show is how to query something from the database. So I've created a finding.py file here, and I'm going to copy paste these 3 things because they're essentially the same. First thing I do is import pymongo, which is the package we're going to use. Then we connect to our client. Then we, of course, connect to our specific database in our system. And then in that database, what is the collection you're using for? Remember that collection has all the different, one book type has a lot of books. So one collection, books collection has a lot of objects. Now I want to find those objects. Well, what do? Well, there is a function called books find function, but we have to spread it. Well, I'll show you. Books.find. Let me do it without one first. And if I do this, it'll return a cursor. Now, in order to find the actual thing, all the values, I have to use the spread operator here, and then I will get all the values. Now, one more thing you can do for your usage or usability, you can surround them with a bracket, so you get them in a bracket, in a list. So now I have that. Well, that's not very interesting. Let's say I want to find a book with the name Live 3.0. What do? Well, it turns out that in this find method, you can pass a query as an argument. You can pass this object, or this dictionary rather, with what you want to find. So let's say I want the name in my document to be equal to Live 3.0. Is there a book that has its name Live 3.0? And it turns out there is a book that has its name like that. Pretty cool. Well, there are other things we can do here. What if I don't want to see this whole object, this whole dictionary here? I only want to see the name of the author. Well, there's another query here. There's another option. First thing we passed was the query. The second thing is the selection query. Selection query is also a dictionary, of course, but you can tell MongoDB what do I want. So let's say I don't want the name, I want everything else. I would set that equal to 0. And everything else will be set to 1. You can only set one thing here. So let's say I said that I want to only see my author name. I set that to 1 and it'll be totally fine. Let's say I want more things. Let's say I want author and name. Clearly I can do that as well. Now if I run this, you'll see that I get name and author. Now it will not dismiss this ID. This ID is, you cannot dismiss that. You can ask it to do that by doing this. ID is equal to 0, but it's of no use because you'll be using that as a specific identifier. But even if you don't specify that, it will give you ID. But if you specify that I specifically don't need ID, the underscore ID, it will always return you ID. And ID is important, something you will be dealing with because it's an identifier for that specific document. Now you understand how to select a query. Let's say I only want the author, and I'll run it and I'll only get the author. Cool. Well, let's comment this out for now. Let's say I want to sort things in some specific order, and it's very simple. Let's say you have seen this before as well, if I don't pass an object or I pass an empty object, it will return me all the books that I have. Well, now what I want to do is I want to sort them in a specific way. Let's say I want to sort them in a published year. So let's say I just do this for now. You'll see that it has published in a descending order, or rather in ascending one, from smallest in the beginning and the largest in the end. Now how do I specify that? Well, in the second argument you can pass in a number, 1 or 0, 1 or minus 1. If I pass in 1, see what happens. It goes from smaller to bigger, ascending. If I pass in minus 1, it'll go descending. 2019 first and 1993 last. Now I can also limit my results, and you will see that in web pages you see this example where there are 10 results per page and you have to click the next button to get the next result. Well, you can limit that very easily. You can say I want to limit my results to only one result, let's say. So let's run this, see what happens. It'll only give me one result. And if I do this, it'll give me the 1993 result, which is this. So this was what I wanted to show, a little introduction to querying. Of course, you can do other things. You can create complicated queries by not passing the object directly here and saving it like this, like my query is equal to name equals live.0, live 3.0. You can pass in multiple queries and it'll find all the documents having this name and whatever parameter you pass in. So this was a little short introduction to querying in MongoDB, or finding your documents in MongoDB. Now in the next section we're going to talk about next thing. We're going to talk about updation and deletion. So stick along, and if you have any question, please ask. So I'll see you in the next one.